Hey guys, it's Courtney and I'm here with my first card using the latest My Monthly Hero card kit. I'm going to be using the stamp set that comes in the kit. It does come with coordinating dies, but today I'm going to be creating a one-layer card. I have my masks cut out already and I'm just kind of laying them out on my card panel here to kind of get my placement right before I begin my stamping. I am going to be stamping on a piece of Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock. This is cut down to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I'm stamping with blackout ink by Ink on 3. This gives a really crisp image, and of course it is Copic safe. So I'm starting off with stamping my little girl and my little boy here and making their hands kind of touch there, and then masking those out with Simon Says Stamp masking paper. I had no trouble with this little boy, but for some reason I was having a hard time lining up my mask for this little girl. I had to keep removing it and trying again. These are pretty intricate images, so if you're having a hard time lining up your masks, you can do one of two things. Cut it in half and cut two separate masks, or find one single point and line that up perfectly and the rest should all fall in place. So when I finally got this right, I used her little face to line everything up, and then as I placed the rest of the mask down, it did line up. Now I'm stamping all of my images that I want to be in front first. So I want this little boy and little girl to be my main focal point. So I stamp them first, and then I'll stamp this little ice that they're going to be ice skating on. And I'm also masking that out as well. Then I'll kind of fill in the rest of my scene. I'm going to stamp this little bench here in the background. I didn't bother to cut the legs, I guess, and the arm of it. These were way too intricate, and I knew I could just go over this with a darker Copic marker. So I just cut out the mask for the actual bench part itself. Next, I wanted to add this tree off to the right-hand side. So I knew I wasn't going to be using the whole image. It was kind of going to be hanging off the card panel. So I just took a scrap piece of paper here. This was actually easier to line up for my masks than this little girl was. I cut it out the best I could. I wasn't worried about getting every single branch perfect, but it actually worked out pretty well. Next, we'll move on to the ink blending, and I'm taking a piece of Eclipse masking paper here, and I'm just cutting a piece about the same size of the card panel and cutting a wavy line down the center. I'm kind of just freehanding this. It does not have to be perfect, but you will want to keep both sides of it. So first I'm masking off the bottom because we're going to be doing the sky first, and I'm using Broken China, Salty Ocean, Blueprint Sketch, and Chipped Sapphire. And again, I grabbed the wrong foam pad here, and I grabbed the one that I normally use for oxide, so I had to kind of tap that off on my scratch paper there. I'm starting with my lightest color in the center, working out to my next darkest color, which is the Salty Ocean, then my Blueprint Sketch, and then finally my Chipped Sapphire. Then I go in reverse back over the entire thing to make sure I get a good blend and good coverage. I want the night sky to be pretty vibrant and dark. So you can go over these as many times as you want. Just keep in mind that Distress ink stays wet longer than regular dye ink does. So your mask may not stick to it immediately. You may need to give it a minute or two to dry before you reposition that mask. Once I did have my sky done, I removed that bottom mask and took that negative piece that we saved, and I'm going to mask out the sky in order to do my snow. Now initially here I was just going to add a little bit of shadow where the snow meets the sky, but I got a little heavy-handed here. I'm using my Shaded Lilac Distress ink, and like I said, normally I would just go over that edge there, but I had a little bit too much ink going on. So I ended up blending that out. I had to go over this quite a few times to make it blend a little bit because I was just way too heavy-handed up there on top. But I kind of faded out to white. It's not completely white, but it'll appear white towards the bottom of my card panel. And when I started removing my mask, I realized I didn't line this up perfectly. There was a little bit of a white line in that one area there. So I just shifted up my mask a little bit and added a little bit more of that shaded lilac and blended that out towards the bottom again. And that covered up that little white line that we had there. Once all of my coloring, or I'm sorry, my ink blending was done, I went ahead and carefully removed my masks. And actually, no, I didn't. I took some shimmer spray and I masked off the bottom because I didn't want any of it to get on my snow. And I just took the nozzle there to kind of just tap on some of that shimmer spray on the top, making this appear to be stars in the sky. Dab that up with a paper towel, and now I will carefully remove my masks. Just keep in mind that these will be wet not only from the distress ink but also from that shimmer spray, so just be super careful when you do remove your masks. Next, for the coloring, I will start with my bench here, and I'm just keeping a highlight in the center. I'm starting off with my lightest color, which is the E53, just adding my darkest areas down first, going in with my E59, adding a few flicks on either side of that bench, and just a line down the middle where the back of the bench meets the bottom, I guess, the seating part, to create a shadow there. Go in with my E57, blend that E59 out. Then I'll move on to my E55 and then finally back to my E53, just leaving a small highlight right there in the center. Now for the arms and for the legs of the bench that we did not bother to cut out, you can see the distress ink covered them all pretty good. So I'm taking my W7, which is a pretty dark color, and I'm just using the very tip of my marker. I'm not doing any shading on these. These are really teeny tiny. And just going over that area, taking a blue marker just for that center of the bench where the sky kind of shows through. Next, I'll move on to my little boy and my little girl. I'm going to color their skin the same way. I'm only using 3 colors here, being their faces are really teeny tiny. Starting off with my lightest color, going to my darkest, then my mid-tone, and then back to my lightest, just putting the shading underneath their hair and their hat. Their hair I'm coloring the same way as well, starting off with that E18, just adding in my darkest areas, which will pretty much be underneath their hat, and her hair is a little wavy, so I did add a few flicks here and there as well. Going on to my E15 and just extending those out a little bit, and my E13 I'll only use on her hair. You don't really see much of his hair. Next, for her jacket, I'm going to start with my lightest color as always and add my darkest areas down first, mapping those out. The darkest areas will be off to the left underneath her arm there where it's kind of pulled behind her, and underneath her hair as well. Going in with my darkest color, going over pretty much the same areas as we did with that lightest color. Moving on to my mid-tone, extending those areas out. I'm also coloring her hat the same way, just adding shading towards the bottom. And then finally going back with my lightest color and blending all of that out. Now, this is a Y marker mixed with the YR markers, so they blend very well together. You may have to work at it a little bit more than you normally would, but they end up blending nicely together. For her pants or her little leggings there, I'm coloring these with my warm grays, starting right off with my W5, blending that out with my W3 and then to my W1. The shading would be underneath her jacket and then where her one leg is behind the other. Just coloring her gloves in white, just using my W1 for those. Then I'll move on to my C3 and C1 just to add a little bit of shading to her ice skates. Wanted to make her ice skates white. Now for him, we'll move on to my BG markers, and these are pretty dark BG markers. Starting off with my lightest color again, mapping out my darkest areas, which will be on the one side of his arm, and it was one arm that's reaching out, it would be underneath. Also underneath his scarf there. For his hat, it would again be on the bottom, and where it's kind of folded over, I just extended that little flick there a little bit further than I normally would to show that the hat is kind of bent down. Going in with my darkest color, going over those same exact areas as we did with the light, then to my mid-tone color, and then finally back to my lightest color and blending all of those areas out as well. I also did add a small shadow underneath their little pockets. Next, for his pants and his scarf, I'm going to move on to, these are blues, but I wanted to make sure that they were more, that they didn't match the sky. So these are completely different. These are more of like a bright blue. And going in with my lightest color, as always, adding my shading for this scarf, it would be off to the right and kind of where the one side of the scarf hangs over the other. For his pants, it would be underneath his jacket and where his one leg is behind the other. Also where his little knees are, appears that his pants are a little baggy and there's a little wrinkle there. So I did add some shading there, going in with my mid-tone and then finally back to my lightest color to blend all of that out. For his skates, I wanted to make them appear to be black. So I'm going in with my C markers here. No, first I took my W5 and W3 to add some shading to his bottom part of his hat and his mittens. Now we'll move on to his skates. Going right in with my darkest color, which will be the C7, which is nearly black. Just adding that shading down towards the bottom of his skates. Moving on to the C5, extending that C7 out a little bit. And then going in with my C3, just to add a little bit of a highlight to his little ice skates there. Next, we'll move on to the tree. I started with a darker brown. This is the E79, and I'm coloring in the bark, I guess, of the tree solid. I'm not doing any shading there, but I didn't want to lose it when I started coloring in the rest of the tree. I'm going to speed this up. This took a little bit of time, but I didn't really concentrate too much on shadowing and things like that. I went right in with my darkest color. This is my G28, and I'm just adding my darkest color towards the center of the tree. And there are some branches that are clearly lying over other ones, and I did add some flicks there just to create some kind of dimension. For the one side of the tree that's kind of hanging off the card panel, you can't really tell what's laying over another piece. So I'm just pretty much putting my shadowing in the center and kind of just randomly putting flicks here and there just to add a little bit more dimension. Next, I'll go in with my my G46 and extending that darkest color out just a little bit. Again, pretty random areas. There are some spaces between these branches that I did not cut my mask for. I'm just coloring them in green. You're never going to know that that's not part of a branch and that it's supposed to be the background. Next, I'll go in with my G24, extend all of that color out pretty much to the tips of all of these branches, just leaving myself a small highlight. I wanted the tree to be pretty dark, but of course there would be a highlight towards the end of the branches, being we do have a center light source here. Finally, going in with my G21, and again, just extending that out and just adding my highlight there right to the tips of the branches. Once my tree was all colored, we'll move on to this little frozen pond that they're skating on. And I wanted this to stand out from my snow and my sky, so I'm going to go in with my BG markers. And these, I'm starting with my darkest color, which is the BG13. I'm just adding a few flicks to either side of this pond. I'm going to keep a very, very strong highlight right there in the center, going over these little lines that are within the image to show some reflection within the ice, I guess. Next, I'll go in with my BG11 and extend that BG13 out a little bit. And then finally my BG10, which will pretty much cover up the entire little pond here. Once I had all of my coloring done, I did take my white gel pen just to add a few little reflections here and there. I added some to their little hats and their little jackets. I did put some on the ice, but it was such a light color you couldn't really even see the gel pen, but that's okay. I'm going to add sparkle to that later anyway. Now, once all of my stamping, or I'm sorry, my coloring was done, well, I'm going to add this little light post here. And it just didn't look like it was straight on my acrylic block, so I took a scrap piece of this Eclipse masking paper that I had off to the side and stamped that down with that same blackout ink by Ink on 3, just to make sure that it was straight before I stamped this onto my card panel. I wish I would have added this earlier before I did my ink blending, because the lantern part of it, I guess, is going to be hard to cover up. So at first I took a yellow gel pen to just fill in the flame. Then I tried different colors of Copic markers to color the rest of the lantern part of it where it would be glowing. But Copics are transparent, so that wasn't working at all. So I ended up taking that yellow gel pen and pretty much going over that entire area to make it look like it is glowing. Next, I will line up my sentiment here, and I'm taking 2 of the sentiments from the stamp set, lining that up on my acrylic block, and I'll stamp this with VersaFine Onyx Black ink right there in the center on top of my card panel. Once my sentiment was down, I wanted to add some shadowing to some of these objects here. So I took a BV marker, and this is the lightest BV marker that I have. And I just added a few little shadows underneath the bench and the light post, as well as the tree. Being I don't have a lighter color than this, I just ended up taking my colorless blender to extend those shadows out a little bit and let that fade right into that shaded lilac. That is the first card for the My Monthly Hero card kit, guys. Thanks so much for stopping by, and have a great day. Bye.